I really like to think about life cycle economics this way, which is what should be your household's cap spend this year and next year and the year after. And of course, as things change, you update, but you always have a cap spend number that will then inform how much you should save and so forth in order to manage your lifetime. So life cycle economics is really household decision making, financial planning, considering the entirety of one's life. And they're what I would call their personal economy.
I'm James Matthews, and this is the Intelligent Retirement Podcast, a show dedicated to helping busy professionals take the guesswork out of planning for retirement. I've spent nearly 2 decades studying retirement, so you don't have to. So turn it up, because your retirement's about to get a whole lot smarter in 3, 2, 1. One afternoon a few years back, I was working on a retirement income plan for a client. It was a routine set of facts, and a plan like many others that I had worked on before. But while I was putting the finishing touches in place, I had a really disturbing thought. What if the traditional way we were taught to approach financial planning is fundamentally flawed? For decades, traditional financial planning has relied on rules of thumb, like the idea that you'll only need 80% of your pre-retirement income, or that your portfolio allocation should be based on your age. But where do these guidelines actually come from? And more importantly, if we just accept them at face value without challenging them or testing them, will they actually work for you when we need them to? Here's the problem. Most traditional financial planning approaches are built around a loose set of assumptions that use the past to predict the future. They often focus on maximizing your rate of return, assuming that's the best way to secure your retirement. Just earn a high rate of return, spend less than you earn, and everything will work out fine, won't it? I set out on a quest to find what the academic literature said about planning for retirement, and what I learned was game-changing. 100 years of economic science, which studied the spending and savings behaviors of real people, held the answer. What if I told you that your biggest financial asset isn't even in your investment portfolio? What if financial planning didn't have to rely on guesswork at all? That's where life cycle economics comes in. Instead of rules of thumb, it provides a rules-based framework that helps answer real-world questions, like whether to take Social Security at 62 or 70, how much you can actually spend in retirement, and even whether a specific tactic, like Roth conversions, might make sense for you. To help us unpack this, I'm really excited to introduce today's guest, who literally wrote the book, Personal Finance Economics. Dr. Robert Puelz is a professor, researcher, and expert in insurance economics and life cycle finance. He earned his Ph.D. from the University of Georgia and has taught at the Cox School of Business at Southern Methodist University since 1992 as a member of the finance department. He's published extensive research on risk management over the years and pivoted to personal finance in 2010. In this episode, you'll learn why some commonly cited financial planning rules of thumb may be leading you in the wrong direction, how an economics-based approach can give you real answers to your biggest financial decisions, why your ability to work may be just as important, if not more important, than your investment portfolio, and be sure to stay until the end to learn the surprising truth about the impacts of financial literacy on financial outcomes. So if you've ever felt like retirement planning is a confusing mix of opinions, products, and rules of thumb based on guesswork, this episode is for you. But before we jump in, here's a quick reminder that this show is sponsored by Consolidated Planning. Since 1981, Consolidated Planning has served clients nationwide with a collaborative approach that ensures that all of your financial planning needs are met by a team of experts. Visit cplanning.com and click the Find an Advisor button for the office nearest you or to schedule a virtual consultation. And with that, here's my conversation with Dr. Robert Puelz. Robert Puelz, welcome to the Intelligent Retirement Podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me, James.
I've been reading your work for quite a few years, and so I'm glad we were able to find some time to catch up today. I think that our audience is going to learn a lot.
Awesome.
Just to get us started, can you talk a little bit about your teaching role currently, and really, more importantly, how you got there in terms of what the path looked like to leading you in the direction of the academic route?
So most of my academic career has been around insurance economics. I got my PhD at the University of Georgia, but I didn't start there. And I started very closely to the personal finance, financial planning world. When I was at the University of Nebraska as an undergraduate, I interned with MassMutual. And over that year and a half that I was with them, it became clear to me I really was interested in the academic world. But while I was there, I learned a lot about life insurance, and I learned a lot about life insurance need selling, and that kind of thing. So much so that while I was there, I went ahead and enrolled with the American College and acquired a CLU and CHFC degree that I really never used professionally. I had, other than obviously I did make some sales when I was there, but I went to the University of Georgia because I was really interested in academics and I was interested in insurance. But in the world of financial planning, it still exists today. There really isn't. Academic institutions and business schools don't embrace it. If they did, I think it could have been an important part of my life. So until like the 2010s, so this is a long time. I got my PhD in Georgia at Georgia in 19 gosh, when was it? 1990. And it took till about 2010 when there was an opportunity to teach a personal finance class at SMU in Dallas. And it was kind of interesting because it wasn't quite different from what I had normally done. It was an offering that they were putting together as part of a business minor. And so I was able to kind of go back to my kind of academic roots, and I started looking for a book. And I'm looking around for a book, and I'm seeing that there is nothing that is, at least at a university level, what I thought to be academically credible. There was lots of okay stuff, but there wasn't really a book on, say, financial planning that was that had an educational foundation. One that I even wanted to offer my students. And so, um, at and these are kind of rough dates, but it's probably within the last 15 years, it'd be fair to say. I found Aaron Stevens, who was at Boston University, and Larry Kotlikoff, who's a professor at Boston University, and began reading their work. And Aaron and I ended up cutting a deal to bring me on board with the book. And it was a book really about life cycle economics and everything about what was being written in that context and what I saw as really the future of financial planning. And so, but I'm kind of juggling like a, a new customer might with what is financial planning and do I need a financial planner and so forth and so on. I was kind of curious why the academic community really hadn't embraced life cycle economics because it was so apparent that we now had an ability to have decision rules, and it wasn't. It's unfair to say that financial planning is conventionally smoke and mirrors. That's overstating it. Financial planners do their best, but it's a lot of arm waving about how clients should make decisions. And so, if you want to evaluate, well, what is it better? I got a job offer in Boston or Chicago. What's really going to be the financial effect? You needed a way to evaluate that, and at that point, arm waving doesn't really present a decision rule. Now, I had been taught a healthy dose of corporate finance in my academic career where we've got all kinds of decision rules, and a lot of them are based on financial theory, which emanates from economic theory. And so corporations make decisions when they budget their capital. Households should be able to have some way to make decisions. The lead in, of course, is that you should have financial advisors that know how to do this. And so it was a head scratcher for me as I learned that the CFP program, which I always kind of admired, really life cycle economics wasn't a part of what they talked about with financial planning. So even today, they really are not doing it, not offering the educational opportunity. In conversations with various people, some of them professionals like you, it's become apparent that conventional financial planning really stemmed from, um, the promotion of investment products by financial institutions. And I got that, and that's still important. But there needs to be a way to make decisions beyond investments. In other words, investment choices should be a part of the decision for sure, like my age or my longevity or the fact that I'm going to get a social security benefit at a certain level. but we need a way to make a decision. So if I said to one of your clients, or maybe you say to one of your clients, well, I've got I have this 401k plan, but I don't know what to do now. I'm ready to retire. Do I convert it to a Roth? Do I not convert it to a Roth? How do I make that decision? Now we've got the ability to actually make an informed decision where the result is a dollars and cents change in a living standard. And part of what makes this all work is Larry Kotlikoff at Boston University built a number of years ago a product originally called ES Planner, but it now is called Maxify, that does the mathematics behind helping make this decision, because it's a very, very complicated problem. And you can't do it with pencil and paper. You can't do it with arm waving. So that then became, I go back to over the last 10 years, the way I started teaching personal finance at SMU. So it was more of a life cycle economics class built for non business students as well as business students, because business students looked at this class and said, I can't believe this. It's like, it seems relevant. We don't talk about it in the business school. Th- they might be able to fit it into an elective. And so that's where we are with this. And it's a bigger question to say, well, why has this not been more globally embraced? But that's kind of how I track to this world where exclusively now I am talking about life cycle economics and not corporate risk management.
There's a whole lot of that you said there that I want to ask about because I think you're right. It's not something that you hear, right? It's not something that the average person I think is even familiar with necessarily. But once you understand it, it makes a whole lot of sense. Just for the benefit of our listening audience, can you define what life cycle economics is? How it's maybe different than what they may be more familiar with from a more of a traditional type of financial planning approach?
I think maybe a good way to kind of think about this is the way that this was thought about a number of years ago by really some of the famous economists that were trying to answer this question: why do people save? Why do they save money? And you go back as 60, 70, 80 years ago, during a more industrial time, people generally retired because the really the toll on their body. But the question about why people save is a really good academic question. The idea here is that you have kind of a working lifetime and you have a retirement lifetime, and that kind of all defines your longevity. And people save because they recognize that during their retirement years, they have no more labor income. And how are they going to pay the bills? And so economists kind of thought, okay, people are saving because that's the way that they really fund retirement. But they laid into that kind of analysis an economic concept called satiation, which is, in economists call it the diminishing marginal utility of consumption. But essentially, what it means is that if you think about, if you have a certain amount of wealth today, you could consume it all today, but you don't for a variety of reasons. One might be that you think about the fact that, well, you're going to retire someday, so you don't want to consume it all today. The other is that how much happier can you make your life in this moment or this year or this 10-year time period by gorging on whatever you're gorging on. So oftentimes the metaphor is related to food consumption. You can only take so much, and then you need to be able to consume in 10 years food to live. And so you're going to make sure you have some money then in order to buy food. And so what economists looked at was that the idea was saving, and what they were observing as savings was consistent with the notion that people generally want to maximize their utility they get from consumption over their lifetime. And so the idea here is, if they want to maximize their utility, what's the best way to do that given their forecasted lifetime? And the answer is that they smooth consumption. And this is a case for most of us who are risk averse, who have longevity, that our highest level of lifetime satisfaction from our consumption is going to be that we smooth consumption, and we can show that mathematically. So In that light, when we talk about consumption, we really mean living standards. So we mean how we spend. All right. So one of the interesting things about this is that if I'm talking to a 35-year-old who is has a family and they're spending, they might want to think about some other things in terms of their financial planning, but they want to kind of think about the entirety of their life. Now, as we get farther in the future, we have more uncertainty for sure. But when you think about how you spend today, and you have a family and you're just trying to pay the bills, there are some facts that are important. One is that you're going to get Social Security retirement benefits. While you have some uncertainty, you have a path for longevity that could be related to family history. Sure, accidents can happen, but if you think what's your max age, that kind of could inform then how you should spend today, given your preferences for retirement. So we get some people today who say, "Well, I can't imagine retiring," right? And I got that. But some people are going to say they're going to have different time periods in which they want to retire, and so a financial plan for someone that wants to work more out to their max age has got to be different than a financial plan for someone who says, well, I'm 35, I'm out at 55. I want to make a whole bunch of money and then I'm out. How does that change my living standard? And we can measure it and we can see, and then they know what the cost of not earning money is. And so this notion of life cycle economics is considering the entirety of one's life, the financial resources that one is going to bring to bear on their life, and then manage your living accordingly. I really like to think about life cycle economics this way, which is that when we use it to think about financial planning for the entirety of our life, that it gives a really key piece of information, which is what should be your household's cap spend this year and next year and the year after. And of course, as things change, you update, but you always have a cap spend number that will then inform how much you should save in order to kind of manage your lifetime. And we can put investments in that piece because whatever you're saving, you got to put at some rate of return or some risk. And that all can kind of be a part of this model. So life cycle economics is really household decision making, financial planning, considering the entirety of one's life and their what I would call their personal economy.
That's a really good summary, I think, because to your point, a client really only has one financial plan, right? Like to your example of a 35-year-old, they only have really one plan that evolves over time. Where in practice, that's not always the way it's approached, right? We see it sometimes done more on a modular basis, that's sort of goal based or overly retirement focused, but through the lens of like a replacement ratio, right? We automatically start by assuming you're only going to need 80% of your income. So what I'm hearing though, you're saying really is that this approach is much more uh, geared towards the individual person and what their life cycle looks like, and developing an approach for them accordingly based on the facts of their case. Is that fair?
Yes, it is. And, no rule of thumb fits in this world. In fact, every financial planner should appreciate that. In other words, we can come up with a number. So why would you want a rule of thumb? It's not a complicated problem anymore because we've got technology. Now, and individuals can do their own financial plan with some guidance. So in our book, Economics Based Personal Finance, we dedicate a chapter to helping individuals do that.
This episode is sponsored by Consolidated Planning. Since 1981, Consolidated Planning has helped families organize, protect, and grow their wealth with its protection first philosophy and unique approach to planning designed to maximize your living standard in retirement. Take the first step toward a more confident financial future by visiting www.cplanning.com. That's the letter C, planning.com. And now, back to our show.
I've heard you use the phrase, pardon me if I get this wrong, but in paraphrasing, that financial planning really, as a discipline, has lacked the internal consistency that's required in order to make it a true discipline or a true profession in the way that like law or maybe accounting, where there are internal standards. You use the phrase rules of thumb, which I love. That's one of the things I've said over the years is that rules of thumb based on guesswork are really shortcuts. There are ways to try to take things that are very complex and make them easy, quote unquote easy for people to digest. But your earlier example, if somebody's going to work till they can't anymore and they're 90 years old, well, do those rules of thumb really make sense? A lot of people, I think, get frustrated or get dogmatic about these rules of thumb sometimes, and it really can impact uh, how they approach their planning, and in a lot of ways causes them to oversave or underspend or sometimes both. Have you seen that as well?
Let me just kind of give you an example of this. So I think we all use the rules of thumb. So if I said that why do these rules of thumb exist still, and the answer is, well, because they're easy. Okay, if someone says what percentage of my gross income could I afford for a monthly home payment, and I would say probably 30-35%. Okay, so now I'm given a rule of thumb, and that was answering a very specific question in that way. But what's really important about that is your annual percentage rate. And so, do you have in the market the best annual percentage rate that's going to be able to get you in that home and help you feel good about getting in that home? So, that's a little bit more kind of extra work. I'm okay with that existing at the same time that we've got better a better educational foundation and better technology to answer really big questions. Um, Now, retirement planning is one of them. The example I mentioned earlier, hey, what I do with my 401k, do I just start drawing or do I Roth convert? I think a really big one that can be measured, as you know, is when do I start drawing Social Security retirement benefits? And the answer is almost always you want to wait till the last, you want to wait till you're 70, 70 and a half. That's when you 70. Gotcha. 70. If your health is good and you got expected longevity, but we can measure it too. So let's measure it and just see what it's like. And we can do that. And so I think when there are big questions that might require that a household seeks advice like you might offer, that the standard has got to be that the financial planner delivers a recommendation based on a decision rule or tool that has an economic foundation. You just can't say, well, it seems to be the case that most people are better off if they wait until they're age 70 to pull Social Security retirement benefits. Or, here are the rules. Here's kind of the benefits of a Roth IRA versus a regular IRA. I've written about this on Substack. Every investment company will list their kind of facts about current state of, what are the tax issues associated with each. Why not just answer that question by putting some numbers in a model where the taxation issues are already included and come up with a dollar amount that really reveals what the present value impact of the decision is going to be. If I'm a financial planner, I got to be doing that. I don't understand why they don't. I know there are financial planners that are embracing life cycle economics, but not enough of them. And if I'm going to pay a financial planner, I'm going to want to make sure that they supplement their offerings to me by considering planning in the context of any decision needs to be focused on what's going to produce my highest sustainable living standard and give me that number. And so if not, if they don't do that, and Kolikoff actually talks about this a lot, that they're really violating a fiduciary standard. I just think that if you've got the information, if we've got the knowledge now, it's probably time we should use it. And that's why I'm kind of shouting from the hilltops on this. I'm still an educator, and all my Substack stuff was essentially bringing my classroom to a more public environment so that other people might be able to tap into this. And that's kind of at least my intent. And that seems to be going in the correct direction, but we'll see.
Yeah, I've seen articles and things that Larry has posted critical of the things you're describing. I would love to have him come on and talk with me in the same manner about some of these things because he's been after this for a long time as you have, and he makes a lot of really good points along those lines. Given that the investment component seems to have really steered the narrative around people thinking that the role of investments or even in retirement is to like maximize your rate of return so that you can somehow spend more money, where the economics based approach takes a completely different viewpoint. Can you talk about that aspect a little bit? Because to me, that was like the biggest aha moment, I think, for me. And seeing that contrast, having kind of grown up in the business on that investment side of things and everything seeming so investment centric around retirement, yet it's really more of a risk management problem when looked at through the economics framework. What are your thoughts there?
We can build investments into this. It's very important. And so financial advisors use a technique called Monte Carlo simulation, which is kind of using the history of baskets of investments, both their returns and their volatility, to kind of forecast out what the value of your IRA or your 401k is going to be in the future and have that help inform what your living standard should be today. And so it creates some uncertainty about the living standard based on how you choose your investments. That's the way the world works. One of the neat things about this is that you can tweak the investment profile and look at the living standard effect, and the uncertainty about the living standard. And you could go less risky on your investment profile and see what that does to your living standard. Okay. One of the things that's really cool about this is that you can also do something called upside investing, which is that you can build a financial plan that assumes that someone has most of their assets in risk-free investments. And when we're talking about that, that's mostly TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, because they're risk-free because they're supported by the federal government, they're adjusted for inflation and so forth. But then you can have a basket of other investments that are in a total stock market index. But you can spend and consume, assuming a safe rate of return, and then adjust your consumption as your riskier investments performance reveals. And you can convert some of those riskier investments to safer investments. And it's a way to really capture the opportunity to live at a higher living standard based on the upside performance with a protection of the downside. So investments are still key for sure, but the neat thing is we can build living standards that take this form of call it this cone of uncertainty that we see on the Weather Channel related to hurricanes. You can do that for living standards. You can have this cone of uncertainty, and that's really the good work of the financial planner that runs different kind of portfolio splits in front of their clients and says, well, here's a portfolio where the investments are a little riskier. Here's a portfolio where the investments are less risky. And this is what we see as potential living standards. And you can come up with the bounds for the living standards, and then people can make an informed decision. It's kind of interesting. I find that when you begin to understand the bounds, you become more generally comfortable with the risk. We've got stuff at our disposal that helps mitigate risk, particularly two things. One is our interest and ability to work and to work longer is one of them. The second is Social Security retirement benefits, which, oh, by the way, are indexed for inflation. And so we've got a floor to our living standard, which are other sources of income beyond investments, which is, our ability to work and our Social Security retirement benefits. So that's really critical. Investments matter a lot. Investment diversification is always, going to be a part of it. But wealth diversification is a broader principle that should be adopted. And you kind of think about, okay, my way of thinking about this is that people become more comfortable with their investment risk taking once they understand that they may have this ability as they approach retirement to work a couple more years. They have this opportunity to defer Social Security retirement benefits, maybe beyond what they want to. And that might permit them then to take a little bit more risk in their investment portfolio, which may be really well advised. So it is, as you suggest, it is a broader view that fits within the context of life cycle economics and does include investments when we think about wealth diversification rather than just portfolio diversification.
Yeah, I've heard the concept described slightly differently by others that If thinking of the economic balance sheet versus a more traditional balance sheet that just has the values of our stuff, right? Whereas an economic balance sheet brings in the consideration the things you're describing. So the present values of social security benefits or remaining human capital, things like that are of value, that are investments in a perhaps less tangible sense, but they're still valuable, right? And I'm incorporating those then into the broader planning considerations can then give us a better understanding of what that future living standard may look like. And it may influence the investment decisions you make if you're incorporating social security or future income and things into the equation.
I think it would blow the mind of a school teacher who's making $50,000 a year and is, an elementary ed school teacher. Oh, you're probably a millionaire in terms of human capital, right? Now, that also informs maybe what their ceiling is in terms of their resources, but that just considers their human capital.
Yeah. So budget constraint, right?
Yeah, that's right. But you've got, I'm looking at college students today, particularly business school students who are going out and making decent money and the present value of their human capital is can be million and a half, $2.5 million if the economy kind of is the same and they have an interest and ability to work. And so I think that's really good to know. I think people, it, I think it's a bit uplifting to know that you're worth a lot in America based on your ability to produce an income, and and it doesn't have to be, you know, you don't have to be a financial advisor to make all the big money. You can be someone like a professor, but you can have, as long as you do well by the jobs that you choose and you have an interest in working, that it's a pretty hopeful lifetime that has its own set of risks that we all confront and so forth, but should be managed and should be thought about in the context of, okay, what does this mean in terms of when I'm saving, how I save, how do I do that most efficiently, so forth.
I can certainly relate to that as the child of two retired school teachers, right? Who've spent their entire careers, one as a college professor, one as a high school teacher, and then both retired now, but very much that same mentality. And I think you're right too for younger people as they're starting out. Retirement's not typically on the mind necessarily of a 25 or a 30-year old as they're starting families and things, but showing the value of that human capital and all the ways that you can influence that human capital from an investment perspective. Sometimes that's the best place to invest, and it's also important that that's protected so that they're able to then go out and turn that into the financial capital that they'll need over a lifetime. I agree with what you said earlier, that would be valuable to teach as part of the core curriculum for those who are studying financial planning, but even those just who are studying personal finance, maybe more casually as non professionals. Kind of along those lines, your most recent paper that you published was into the topic of financial literacy and its influence on well being. I think it's commonly discussed frequently that people just need more financial education and that financial literacy will help people become wealthier. But there's also a pretty well documented gap between knowing things and actually applying them, right? What did you find in your research, and how would you respond to that idea that from a financial literacy perspective, that people just need more information and they'll make better decisions?
That's a great question. So I would tell you that the research that is tries to look at financial education, financial literacy, and various outcomes is conflicting on a particular topic, and that is, do people that have higher levels of financial literacy have better economic outcomes? The paper I published with my son, we're kind of looking for a cause and effect because he's kind of a cause and effect type of statistician. We actually found higher levels of financial literacy were more related to worse economic outcomes. But I think the more important point is that people that have high financial literacy generally are more highly educated for sure. and we're controlling for a variety of things, but I think that people of high financial literacy don't necessarily need to have it on their own. In other words, they probably have an advisor, or they're relying on other people, or they're just simply more educated. And to be fair, there's research that suggests that higher levels of financial literacy do produce better economic outcomes. Um, but that's really the question: is that, well, if we drop public money into this bucket, does it have a payoff? I think that's very doubtful that it does. And part of that may be how financial literacy is taught. It may be the kind of set of principles, and there's this cottage industry of books and terms and all that other kind of stuff. I think financial literacy is important. I do think it's important to kind of understand how the world works. It's a life skill akin to knowing how to run your washing machine. I think it should be, I have a good example of this is I got undergraduates going out to work, and they have no interest in retirement, but they go to work for an employer that has a 401k plan. They may have to make a decision out of the box. Do I take the matching contribution? Do I not? Or do I invest it? That kind of stuff. Okay, we're talking about a retirement plan. Yeah, I know. You're 23. You need to. This matters now in terms of how you make your choice, right? So, um, some competence about that is important, for sure. But people of low financial literacy, a lot of it could be that they have lower levels of education, and lower levels of education tend to be correlated with lower salaries, right? So we know that there is this relationship between education and salaries that is generally positive. And I think I would think about it this way: being financially literate doesn't mean that you're going to have a better lifetime economic outcome in terms of your own personal finance, in terms of your own financial well-being. I think that's contrary to a lot of public perception about this. Now, the concern is that, well, if we're going to dump public money into high schools to raise levels of financial literacy, is that going to make people better off? I don't think it will. I think that I think more I think better general education is better. We didn't find in our research, and we used really good data provided by the FINRA Foundation. We just didn't find that there really was the positive effect between financial literacy and economic outcomes. Okay, so that's just one study. Other studies have different results. Academics have typically looked at this problem in this way. They'll look and they'll say, well, we find that higher people that are less financially literate, we can kind of measure this, are more likely to have payday loans, or they're correlated with payday loans. So, well, of course they are. I mean, if people that are generally not financially literate probably have lower levels of education. And it doesn't mean that they're going to get a payday loan, because they're financially illiterate. And if they know that that's a bad idea, that they shouldn't do it, they just have a job and they have a life that requires them to go get a payday loan, even though that they shouldn't probably be doing that. And so there's this history to the way academics look at financial literacy and financial education to see if it really matters, that oftentimes was just based on studies that correlated variables where the academic is saying this is something you shouldn't do. Well, I don't know. What does the academic know? I agree that I would never advise going to a strip mall and getting a payday loan, but I don't know what the life of the person is like who does that.
Sometimes things like that are the least bad option, right? That sometimes real life says, right, and not on a spreadsheet, not in a textbook, but sometimes there aren't good options, and or there are less bad options. And if it comes down to feeding your children, or avoiding a payday loan because some guru said so, which thing are people really going to do? As we start to wrap this up, what's the one thing that you think that folks that are planning for retirement, or engaged in financial planning, what's like the one thing you think people miss, or something that they could do to immediately improve their outcome, that's maybe something that's a little different than what the mainstream might suggest?
My feeling about that is one thing that I think CFPs or financial advisors probably do a pretty good job about, and you could speak better to this, would be that you need to have taxes as a part of the story. And so when you're making a decision, the tax consequences based on the current law as written now needs to be considered. And that's important from capital gains to employer sponsored plans to individual plans, a Roth or a regular IRA. And so the beauty of taking someone who's on the cusp of retirement and evaluating what they should do with next steps by using life cycle economics um, is that the primary tool I use, Baxify, incorporates tax law. And so the tax law is already built in. So the advisor can go ahead and give advice. And you don't have to have a CPA as a part of that. But I think the accounting, the tax issue is really important. The other, which Maxify and life cycle economics can't really speak to, is the estate planning consequences. So you kind of need to have that person on the team to know kind of how you need to be setting up your money. Now, the beauty of life cycle economics is that, James, if I have a chunk of wealth now and I'm thinking about my personal legacy, and let's say I want to bequest to my family or and maybe an institution, I can put that money, at least metaphorically, aside as part of the financial plan and then base my living standard after that. So I can incorporate those kind of preferences. I think having a conversation as you approach retirement about what the end should be like gets to not it gets to the issue of a living standard for sure, but then really good risk management in terms of Medicare and any supplements, some extended care opportunities. How are we going to afford them? Is that going to be a deal? Do we need to think about managing the risk? To actually having a frank conversation, I, you can speak better to this than I can for sure. But um, James, if I ask you, how long are you going to live? That's a tough question to answer. You might confront, that really is so critical. Now, for an advisor, it seems to me to ask. It just seems like you got to have that conversation. Someone may say, well, I don't want to think about it. Okay, fine. Or they may say, well, granddad lived to 95 and everyone seems to be living that long. That is really important then to think of. That's an important consideration in terms of the retirement. The financial advisor can go ahead and build a plan based on, a longevity of 100 or 105, whatever. Just know that the living standard's got to be a little lower during retirement in order to kind of think about that. But that's really good work, isn't it? But it's an important question, I think, that sometimes is avoided because there's a lot of uncomfortableness talking about death. It's pretty critical, though. And I'm sure if you have a client who's fairly ill, if they only have 10 more years to live, is a little richer because they have a shorter lifetime. And so, they can manage a balance of that in accordingly while also kind of thinking about interests and do they want to leave a legacy or not. You got a lot of people that are, may not want to leave a legacy, don't really have anybody to leave a legacy to. Well, they can have a lot of fun now, right? And we don't want to get in the way of that either. There needs to be a room in any financial plan for those preferences, and life cycle economics permits it.
Yeah. I think the word we would use to describe that's efficiency, right? It's getting the maximum value or benefit out of the fewest amount of resources, right? I think that's how an economist might use the word. But around estate transfer and taxes and all those things, that's really just about maximizing the value of the dollars you have, whether they're going to family members or whether they're being consumed, right? That ultimately that's most people's goal, I think.
That's right. And when I took the CHFC exam, we spent a good deal of time during that in estate planning. I know virtually nothing about that topic now. I'm just learning it from other people that are the experts about, what kinds of things are out there. I kind of think about thresholds for being able to pass on assets without any estate tax, but um, I think there are lots of interesting vehicles. And I was asking, a friend the other day about, you know, one of the ideal financial advisors is that person who's also a CPA and is an estate planning attorney. And that would be incredibly rare. But if you can find a financial advisor that integrates well with a CPA and an estate planning attorney, that's kind of a sweet spot, it seems to me, for retirement planning. I put my money in the brain power of the folks that can really help me manage my money most efficiently. And that gets to a tax story. Yeah.
And even if it's not all one person, just having an integrated team of people who have that particular skill set, and you can kind of wrap around the client where appropriate. I would agree completely that it's a valuable thing. It's a rare thing, but it's an important thing, and certainly does go beyond just simply paying for investment management. So as we wrap up, this is obviously a show about retirement, but at this stage of your life and your career, you've been teaching at SMU for over 30 years. Like, what does retirement mean to you at this point, and what does that look like?
Well, um, I accepted a retirement package from SMU, but that is it's a longer term deal. It doesn't mean in academics that is stopping. I'm going to stay with SMU through the May of 2026, and that's kind of an SMU specific thing. I can't imagine ever retiring. I always had the intention 3 years ago of bringing my classroom to Substack because I thought people needed to hear about life cycle economics. That's proved to be fairly successful. And so that is going to be something, hopefully, that I start extending now that way. I'm also, one bit of self promotion is I will be doing short courses on Teachable related to kinds of topics that we're discussing now. So I see a flexibility in life. I've always had a flexible life because university professors do. But I really don't see, for me, I'm not going to do anything different than I normally do. It's just going to be outside the context of SMU. I was there a long time, and academicians, it's good to kind of move away so that they can go and fill the position, and it ended up working really well for my timing. So thank
Excellent.
you for asking. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think it's just always interesting to hear, right, from folks in terms of after spending an hour talking with me about retirement, what your personal thoughts are. We'll certainly link in the show notes to your Substack and to some of the other resources that you've mentioned. But if people want to find out more about the work that you're doing, or where to find your book, where should they go?
So go to Robert Puelz and Substack in a search and you'll find me. It's robertpuelz.substack.com. That's my spot. It's not, it's not an AI bot. As long as I'm on Substack, I'll be a no ads kind of person. I've got free subscribers. I got paid subscribers. Paid subscribers get some added benefits, but that's where they can find me, and that's the way they can communicate with me. And I love to have them. We're at well over 4,000 subscribers now. What I love about Substack, and I will always maintain, is it's while it's social media in some sense, it's well behaved social media, and there's not a lot of garbage. If I get people commenting with garbage, they get put in a dustbin. But it's a really good environment where it's a safe space to get good information. I'm all about education and not really selling anything except my Substack subscription. So I'm not selling financial securities or anything like that. That's where they can find me. That's where they can get me. I can respond to their questions and then they can go in and go from there. But yeah, thank you for asking.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for spending the time with me today, certainly, and with our audience, and just for all of the valuable contributions that you've made over the years through your teaching, through your writing. I can say with all honesty that you've really helped shape a lot of my thinking about many of the issues surrounding retirement and really around life cycle economics. And
Thank
that's
you.
been a
Thank
big influence on me and my practice and my clients. So we all thank you collectively, and
Well,
are
your
certainly grateful
clients,
for all that you've done.
James, your clients are lucky to have you because you seem to have a really thoughtful approach to how you work with them. And life cycle economics can be a piece. I think it should be primary, but it should be a piece of every advisor's thinking. And you're obviously doing that for your clients, so that's a great thing.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you again for joining us on the Intelligent Retirement Podcast, and you be well.
Okay, take care.
That's all the time we have for today. For more information or a full list of episodes with show notes, visit myintelligentretirement.com. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes. And if you like what you're hearing, be sure to share us with a friend. We look forward to seeing you again next time
on the Intelligent Retirement Podcast.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources that are believed to be reliable, please keep in mind that individual situations may vary. Therefore, the information should only be acted upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guard Ian, Intelligent Retirement, or Consolidated Planning, and all views and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. James Matthews is a registered principal and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC. Securities products and advisory services are offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC. James Matthews is a financial representative of the Guard Ian Life Insurance Company of America, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guard Ian. Consolidated Planning and Intelligent Retirement are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Park Avenue Securities or Guard Ian. Compliance ID 79461-211 expires May 2027.